Hi, welcome to Torah Talk with Tamar. I'm Tamar, and on today's episode, I'll be demonstrating how to make a basic kosher homemade bread for less than $3. Hi, I'm Tamar. I'm a scholar of the Hebrew Bible, a writer, and a homeschooling, homesteading, home birthing, Torah keeping, widowed mother of 7. Together, we live in the southern Appalachian, Southwest Virginia region of the United States, where I keep sheep, grow crops, and cook our meals from scratch, together with my 5 boys and 2 girls. Welcome to my channel. Over the years of raising my children at home, I've looked for ways to save money on biblically clean foods. One of those ways has been making most of my food at home from scratch. And this is one of my favorite bread recipes that I've enjoyed because it's robust, strong, and uses basic ingredients that I almost nearly always have in the kitchen. My children have grown up on homemade breads for years. When I started, when my firstborn was very small, and I didn't have access to these foods in grocery stores. A biblically clean bread is different than other breads because the dairy is kosher or biblically clean, meaning there's no additives in it that are harvested from hog, which is generally a filler that they use in dairy. With this recipe, the ingredients are so basic, it's very easy to declare it biblically clean. I use the word kosher, but it doesn't necessarily have to be baruched or blessed by a rabbi. You can make this at home, you can do it yourself, and you can make sure that the ingredients in it have no pork or unclean animals or unclean dairy in it. So let's get started. This is a yeast bread, so you're going to need 1 package of yeast to start with, and I'm going to go ahead and open that with scissors and get it in the bottom of my mixing bowl. And by the way, I'll put all these recipe measurements in the comments and in the description. Let me grab my scissors. It's 1 package of yeast. Okay, and then you're going to need 1.5 cups of warm water to get the yeast frothing, and let's do that. For best results, use about 1/4 cup of water to proof the yeast. Once that's looking like a foam, it has froth, then add the 1.5 cups of water to make the recipe, the 1.5 cups of water that the recipe calls for. I'm going to heat this over the stove to warm it up, and generally the rule is for making bread, it needs to be 90 and 110 degrees. Now, when I first started making bread, I used one of those cool looking thermometers, and if you're not as experienced making bread, you might want to try one of those. Over the years, I'm just familiar now with what the water looks like, but you don't want it too hot because you will kill your yeast. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the pot and warm it up over the stove. It's very important that your yeast builds a froth. If the yeast does not froth, then it's no good. You have to start over with another package of yeast. And sometimes I buy yeast in the jars, but I get better results in the packets. I've bought entire jars, $7, and the bread didn't rise. So if I want to make sure that the bread is going to rise, this is my go-to. So let's get the water warmed up. Now also, I'm not preheating the oven for this yet because the mixture that you make in the beginning is going to sit for about 30 minutes, and that's so that the bread can really absorb, the flour can really absorb the water. And while I'm waiting on that, I can go ahead and crack the 2 eggs and prep those. This is a recipe that uses honey, and it's a real treat. We went to buy bees to get our bee boxes started, and this summer we bought them, and a lady that I picked up the bees from gave me some honey from her bees, which is really nice. This is local, and this is going to be a real treat to be able to use honey from another beekeeper who lives local. I'm thinking that this is ready. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the water into the yeast and stir. And I'm going to put a picture up here, a video actually. I'm pretty sure I have a video too, of what the yeast should look like to know that it is doing, that it's active and that it's frothing properly. Because you get a sign in the beginning if it's not. Usually it takes about 3 to 5 minutes for the yeast to build that foam, and you can add some honey or sugar to help it along. I'm going to see if this does it on its own without adding anything yet. Meanwhile, you need a 1/4 cup of butter for this recipe in the beginning. So while that's frothing, I'm going to go ahead and melt that over top of the stove here. So half a stick here, 1/4 cup. They've got these nice lines on here so you don't mess up. Very helpful. All right. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the pot. You want it to melt slowly. Don't boil the butter because it will change the texture of the butter. And, you know, I take this stick and I save it and let it soften throughout the day while I'm making the bread and letting it rise and letting it cool down. You know, it's a few hours to make the bread, and it'll soften up and you can use it to put on top of the bread. So I'm going to go ahead and add the 1/4 cup of butter, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 eggs, and a 1/4 cup of honey, along with 3 cups of your whole wheat flour. So the order I'm going to do this in is, first I want to create a nice strong liquid base. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the butter. I'm going to go ahead and put in the honey. And I'm going to save a little bit of it back because it's a little bit more than a 1/4 cup when I poured it. I'm going to put in the eggs. Give this a stir. I have a nice liquid base here. And I'm going to make sure that egg is really broken up. All right. And now 3 cups of the whole wheat flour. I keep my whole wheat here. And I'm going to sift this as I go. Now I'm going to add my salt on top of that. And stir it around. You know, a fun fact, I've been making bread for about 19 years and I've never owned a mixer. I've always made my breads by hand. And I believe you can taste a difference when you're making it by hand. It'll also give you a real strong arm after doing this for years. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it by hand. You don't need any expensive machinery for this. You know, especially when you're just starting out in life and your children are real small. You know, a spatula and a mixing bowl, that's where it's at. You don't need a bunch of fancy equipment. And women have been making bread for centuries without, a bunch of fancy equipment. You know, if you're running a commercial business, you need that. But don't be intimidated by fancy machinery. Just grab a spatula and a mixing bowl and, sorry, something went by my door, and, you know, get moving. So you've got a mixture here that you're making it about like this, and you're going to let that sit for 30 minutes and then continue. Be sure to cover it while you let it sit for 30 minutes. Okay, so we've let this sit for about 30 minutes, and now we're going to add the all-purpose flour. And whatever flour you use for this step needs to be a lighter flour than the whole wheat flour. And the purpose of this sitting is so that the water can really absorb all that whole wheat flour. Now, for a little bit lighter flour, we're going to add this half a cup at a time for a total of 2 cups. So it will be 4 times that we're adding and stirring. And this is half a cup at a time. I'm going to sift it again. Just going to sit that in there. Again, stirring with the spatula. Once I get towards the end, I'll go ahead and get in there with my hands. But for now, the spatula will work. It's a great workout for your arms. All right. Now I'm feeling like I want to get in there with my hands. So I'm going to scrape the spatula clean with a knife. I'm going to work that in. I'm actually going to stop there with 1.5. It seems to be holding the flour very well. Okay, I'm going to let this sit for 15 minutes. So I got my board cleared off of any sticky honey that might be on there. I made sure it's real dry, and I just sprinkled some flour so that when it's time to knead, I can knead it right here on the island. And we've let that sit for 15 minutes, and now we're going to put it out on the board and work our magic and make it smooth. So about 10 minutes of kneading should be fine. You can do this by hand without a fancy machine. And it has this nice dark color. This is a whole wheat bread mixed with a lighter flour as well. And I like that combination because it's not too heavy of a bread. You know, this is an art too. It's for necessity, but so there are some spots on this bread where it just doesn't want to congeal together, but after it rises, we're going to separate this into 2 loaves. So I feel like it's not really necessary to make sure it congeals perfectly, but I'm going to go ahead and put this back in the bowl to rise. Now, I will say as a disclaimer, traditional bread making recipes will tell you to wash the bowl and grease the bowl and then do a whole thing. Well, somewhere in my 19 years of bread making, probably about 5 to 10 years in, I just stopped doing that. Well, 1, I was really busy with more children, but 2, I started questioning, like, do I really need to? And honestly, I just stick it right back in there and it still rises. And if there's a little bit of loss from it sticking, so be it. It's not worth the scraps of pennies. So we got a nice ball of dough here. We're going to put it in. We're going to cover it, and it's going to rise and about an hour until it doubles. Okay, our dough has doubled. It's risen. It's time to divide it into 2 loaves and put them in these pans. Let me see if I can show you a good shot of what it looks like. Oh, the color is so beautiful. It's risen. And as you can see, I didn't bother to clean and grease the bowl. I've just found over the years, even though the recipes say to do that, it works just fine otherwise. So I'm going to push this down just a little to get any gases out of it. And I'm going to check to see how sticky the dough is. This would be a good time to add a little bit of extra flour if it's on the sticky side. The other thing you can do is add flour to the pans, which is what I'm going to do. You don't want to put too much so it doesn't burn. I'm going to put some flour on my hands and work with this. All right. I'm going to divide this into 2 loaves. A little bit on the gentle side. Again, it's sticky. Gonna put them right into the pans and just very gently try to spread it out, but not too hard because you don't want the bread to become calloused or too misshapen. So same thing, I'm gonna take my towel and cover this so it doubles again and rises up. And 45 minutes to an hour for that round. When it's been about 45 minutes to an hour, go ahead and check your bread. This will be the time that you want to preheat the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't be discouraged if the loaves aren't perfectly shaped, because when they rise, they will still rise well, and they're going to taste delicious. Cook the bread for about 30 to 35 minutes. When it's cooled down and you can touch the pans, they should pop right out. Be prepared to enjoy a robust, succulent, delicious, biblically clean bread for less than $3. Here we are, 2 loaves, less than $3. This is a great, hearty food to eat, especially in the middle of an inflation. These breads have sustained my family for years. Thank you for joining me on Torah Talk with Tamar. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can join in other videos discussing Torah and everyday life. Shalom.